These are the 5 forms of service that, according to St. John Paul II, are working against the prayers and blessings of Catholic women who have them in their prayer lives without knowing it. And in the next 30 minutes, you're going to see the difference between the 5th and most dangerous form of service, then the 4th form of service, then the 3rd, then the 2nd, all the way down to the 1st, the one that is probably already in your prayer life right now. Service performed to please people. Service performed to please people happens when you pray, when you fast, when you serve at your parish, when you care for someone. Not because God is asking you to, but because you need someone else to approve of you, to thank you, to notice what you sacrificed. Pope John Paul II wrote in his letter on the dignity of women that service without love becomes a performance, and performance makes the heart a stage, not an altar. Dorothy Walsh, 72, from Charleston, had served on the Altar Guild for 17 years without missing a Sunday, felt constant resentment that no one thanked her enough, and when her spiritual director asked her to stop serving for 1 month to pray in silence, she discovered that her prayers finally felt heard again. Service that requires applause cannot carry grace. Later in this video, we have the 3rd form of service, the 4th form of service, and the 5th and most dangerous form of service, according to St. John Paul II. And now, the 2nd form of service. Service performed to avoid facing God. This form of service happens when you fill every moment with tasks, with ministries, with duties, so that you never have to sit in silence and hear what God is asking you to become. Pope John Paul II understood this deeply. He taught that activity without contemplation becomes noise that drowns out the voice of the Father. He survived an assassination attempt in 1981 and spent months recovering, unable to move, unable to serve in the way he had always served. And in that forced stillness, he wrote some of his most profound reflections on suffering and prayer. He learned that God speaks most clearly when our hands are still. You can be so busy serving that you never actually encounter the one you claim to serve. Margaret Simmons, 68, from Albuquerque, spent 15 years leading 3 parish ministries, cooking for every funeral, visiting the sick, organizing fundraisers, always exhausted, always saying yes. And her confessor finally asked her, "When was the last time you sat before the Blessed Sacrament and did nothing?" She could not remember. He told her to step down from 2 of her ministries and spend 1 hour a week in front of the tabernacle, without a prayer list, without an agenda, just present. She said it terrified her at first. She said, "I realized I had been running from God by serving God. And the moment I stopped running, I had to face what I had been avoiding, that I was angry at him for something that happened years ago." Adus. Within 3 weeks of sitting in silence, she finally forgave what she had buried under decades of service, and her prayer life came back to life. Busyness is the most respected form of resistance in the Church. Later in this video, we have the 4th form of service, and the 5th and most dangerous form of service, according to St. John Paul II. And now the 3rd form of service. Service performed to earn forgiveness. This is the form of service where you believe that if you just do enough, if you just sacrifice enough, if you just exhaust yourself enough for others, God will finally forgive you for what you did years ago, or for what you failed to do, or for what you believe disqualifies you from his love. Pope John Paul II spent his entire papacy teaching the truth of divine mercy. He met with the man who shot him, Mehmet Ali Agca, in a prison cell in Rome 2 years after the assassination attempt, and he forgave him face to face. He did not forgive because the man had earned it through service or penance. He forgave because mercy is a gift that cannot be earned. He wrote extensively about this, that God's love is not a wage, it is a relationship, and when we treat service as payment for sins, we turn grace into a transaction and make ourselves slaves instead of daughters. You cannot work your way into God's arms. You can only receive what he has already offered. Helen Carter, 70, from Richmond, had been serving at her parish soup kitchen every Saturday for 12 years, never missed a day, drove 40 minutes each way, stayed late to clean, and still felt spiritually empty, still felt that God was distant, still woke at night with the same guilt she had carried since her daughter stopped speaking to her 18 years ago after an argument Helen could not undo. One Saturday, a visiting priest who was helping serve noticed how mechanical her movements were, how she never smiled, how she looked like someone fulfilling a sentence. After the meal, he asked if they could talk, and she told him everything: the estrangement, the guilt, the years of service she hoped would somehow balance the scales. He asked her, "Do you believe God has forgiven you?" She said, "I do not know if I deserve it." He said, "That is exactly the point. None of us deserve it. That is why it is called mercy." He told her about Pope John Paul II's encyclical on mercy, how the Pope had written that God does not wait for us to become worthy. He makes us worthy by loving us first. She went home that night, and for the first time in 12 years, she did not add extra acts of service to her schedule. She sat in her living room and prayed the Divine Mercy chaplet that the priest had given her, and she wept because she finally understood that her service had been an attempt to pay a debt that Jesus had already cancelled. Within 2 months, her daughter reached out. They had not spoken in nearly 2 decades, but something had shifted. Helen continued serving at the soup kitchen, but now she served because she was loved, not to become loved. Service offered as payment closes the heart to the very mercy it seeks. And the 5th and most dangerous form of service, according to St. John Paul II, is coming. And now, the 4th form of service performed to control the outcome. This form of service happens when you believe that if you just pray hard enough, sacrifice enough, volunteer enough, offer enough masses, God will be obligated to give you what you want. You are not serving Him, you are attempting to manage Him. You are treating prayer like a negotiation and service like leverage. Pope John Paul II understood this temptation because he lived through some of the darkest periods of human history. He lost his mother when he was 8, his older brother when he was 12, his father when he was 20. He lived under Nazi occupation and then Soviet oppression. He saw faithful Catholics suffer and die without the outcomes they prayed for. In his apostolic letter, Salvifici Doloris, he wrote that suffering is not a punishment we can avoid through enough service. It is a participation in the cross of Christ. And the cross was not about control, it was about surrender. He taught that when we try to control God through our service, we are no longer in relationship with Him. We are trying to manipulate Him, and manipulation is the opposite of love. God does not owe you anything, not because He is cold, but because love cannot be bought. You cannot serve your way into guaranteed outcomes. Barbara Hensley, 73, from Springfield, had spent 9 years praying a daily rosary, attending every First Friday Mass, fasting twice a week, offering her service at the parish office, all of it directed toward one intention: that her son would come back to the church. He had left the faith 20 years ago, married outside the church, stopped attending Mass, stopped speaking to her about anything religious. She believed that if she just increased her sacrifices, if she just prayed harder, God would be forced to intervene. She added more devotions, more masses, more fasting, and still nothing changed. Her son remained distant, and she became more and more bitter, not at her son, but at God. She began to resent the very service she was offering. It felt like a job she hated but could not quit because she had invested too much. One evening, after a particularly difficult conversation with her son, where he told her he wished she would stop trying to save him, she sat in her car outside his house and wept. She drove to her parish and found her priest locking the church doors, and she asked him, "Why is God ignoring me?" The priest, an older man who had known her for years, asked her to sit with him in the empty sanctuary. He said, "You have been serving God like He is your employee, and you are upset that He is not performing the way you expected." She was stunned. She said, "I have given everything." He said, "You have given everything except trust. You have never once surrendered the outcome. You have been trying to control God instead of letting God be God." He opened his breviary and read her a passage from Salvifici Doloris, the part where Pope John Paul II writes that redemptive suffering only becomes redemptive when we stop demanding that it produce the results we want and start offering it as an act of participation in Christ's love without conditions. She sat in that pew for 2 hours after the priest left, and for the first time in 9 years, she prayed without asking for her son to change. She prayed only to accept whatever God allowed. And she felt something break open inside her chest, a tightness she had carried for so long that she thought it was just part of who she was. 3 weeks later, her son called her and asked if they could have dinner, not to talk about religion, just to talk, and she said yes. And for the first time in years, she did not try to steer the conversation toward the church. She just listened, and he said at the end of the meal, "I have missed you, Mom." He did not come back to the faith that night, but their relationship began to heal, and she realized that God had been answering her all along, not by controlling her son, but by freeing her from the need to control him. She still prays her rosary every day, but now she prays it as an offering, not a bargaining chip. She still serves at the parish office, but now she serves because she loves God, not because she is trying to force His hand. Patricia Thornton, 69, from Columbus, spent 6 years offering masses for her husband's cancer to be healed, refused to accept any outcome except complete remission. And when he passed, she stopped going to Mass entirely because she believed God had betrayed her, until a grief counselor who was also a deacon told her that God had not ignored her prayers. He had been present in every moment of her husband's suffering and her own. But she had been so focused on the outcome, she demanded that she missed the present she needed. She returned to Mass 8 months later and wept through the entire liturgy because she finally understood that God's love had never left. She had just closed herself to it by insisting it look a certain way. Write one word in the comments right now if you recognize this form of service in your own life. If you have ever found yourself serving God while secretly trying to control the outcome, while offering your devotion like a payment plan instead of a relationship, write recognize. Do not rush past this. If this is in your life right now, name it. Write identify if you are willing to examine your service tonight and ask yourself honestly whether you have been offering it with open hands or clenched fists. The women in these stories did not lose their faith when they stopped trying to control God. They found it for the first time. They discovered that the love they had been working so hard to earn had been waiting for them the entire time, and the only thing blocking it was their own refusal to receive it without conditions. You have now heard 4 forms of service that close the heart to divine love, and if you have recognized even one of them in your own life, you already know why your prayers have felt blocked, why your service has felt empty, why you have felt distant from God even while doing everything the church asks. But there is one form of service that is more dangerous than all of these, more embedded in Catholic practice, more commonly praised, and more directly responsible for the spiritual emptiness that faithful women carry without ever naming it. And now, the 5th and most dangerous form of service, according to St. John Paul II, service performed in place of receiving love. This is the form of service where you give and give and give because you do not believe you are allowed to receive, where you exhaust yourself caring for everyone else because you believe that your value is in what you do, not in who you are. You serve until you are empty, because the only time you feel worthy is when you are needed. And if you stop being needed, you believe you stop mattering. Pope John Paul II saw this everywhere in the church, especially in women. He saw women who had spent decades serving their families, their parishes, their communities, and who had never once allowed themselves to rest in the presence of God without an agenda, without a task, without something to offer. He wrote about this in his letter on the dignity and vocation of women, Mulieris Dignitatem, where he named the spiritual danger of reducing a woman's identity to her service, as if her belovedness depended on her usefulness. He taught that God does not love you because of what you do. He loves you because you are his daughter, and if you cannot receive that love, if you can only perform to earn it, then your service becomes a wall between you and the Father, instead of a bridge. This form of service is praised in every parish. It is rewarded with appreciation and dependence. No one questions it because it looks like holiness. But Pope John Paul II knew that it was one of the most common ways that faithful Catholic women lose their hearts while keeping their hands busy. You cannot serve from an empty well, and you have been trying to draw water from a place that has been dry for years. Louise Garrett, 71, from Raleigh, had been the primary caregiver for her mother for 14 years, her husband for 6 years after his stroke, and her sister during the final 2 years of her sister's life. She had 3 children, none of them nearby, all of them busy with their own families, and none of them understood how completely Louise had disappeared into the role of caregiver. She prayed every morning. She attended daily mass when she could. She offered her exhaustion as a sacrifice, and she told herself that this was what it meant to be a faithful Catholic woman. But she had not laughed in years. She had not felt joy in years. She had not felt the presence of God in years. She felt like a machine that performed tasks and then collapsed at night. And when people at her parish told her how strong she was, how devoted, how selfless, she wanted to scream because she did not feel strong. She felt erased. One Sunday after Mass, a visiting missionary sister noticed Louise sitting alone in the back of the church, long after everyone else had left. And the sister sat down beside her and said, "You look like someone who has forgotten her name." Louise said, "I do not even know what that means anymore. I'm just whoever needs me." The sister, who had spent 30 years working in hospice care, said, "That is not service. That is self-abandonment. And God does not ask you to abandon yourself. He asks you to bring yourself to him so that he can love you, and then you serve from that love, not instead of it." Louise said, "I do not know how to do that. I have been taking care of people my entire life. If I stop, who am I?" The sister said, "You are his beloved daughter, and he has been waiting for you to believe that." She told Louise about a retreat she was leading the following month, a weekend of silence and rest, specifically for women who had spent their lives caring for others, and she said, "I do not think you can afford not to come." Louise almost said no. She had a dozen reasons why she could not leave for a weekend, but something in her broke at the word beloved, and she heard herself say yes. The retreat was held at a Carmelite monastery 2 hours from her home, and for the first time in over a decade, Louise spent 2 full days without a single responsibility, without anyone needing her, without a task to complete. The sisters did not ask her to do anything except be present. On the second morning, she sat in the chapel during adoration, and for the first time in years, she did not bring a prayer list. She did not ask God for anything. She just sat there, and she began to weep, not because she was sad, but because she realized she had not let God look at her in years. She had only ever presented him with her work. She had been so afraid that if she stopped being useful, she would stop being loved, that she had never tested whether the love was there without the service. That afternoon during confession, she told the priest, a Carmelite friar who had known Pope John Paul II personally during his years in Rome, "I do not know how to receive love. I only know how to earn it." The priest said, "Pope John Paul II used to say that the greatest poverty in the church was not the lack of resources. It was the lack of people who believed they were worth loving just as they were. And he spent his entire life trying to convince people that God's love is not a wage, it is a gift. He gave her one instruction for the rest of the retreat: to sit in the chapel every morning and every evening and pray only one sentence: "Father, let me feel how you see me." She did exactly that for the remaining day of the retreat, and by the time she left, she still did not have all the answers, but she had felt something she had not felt in over a decade. She had felt held. When Louise returned home, she made a decision that terrified her. She told her children that she needed help, that she could not continue carrying everything alone, and that if they could not provide support, she was going to hire someone part-time, even though it felt like an admission of failure. Her oldest son, who had always assumed his mother was fine because she never complained, was shocked. He said, "Mom, why didn't you tell us sooner?" She said, "Because I thought my value was in not needing anything from anyone." Within 2 weeks, her children had arranged a rotating schedule to help with responsibilities, and Louise had 3 mornings a week to herself for the first time in 14 years. She used those mornings to sit in her parish adoration chapel, and she did not bring a rosary, she did not bring a prayer list, she just sat there and let God love her, and slowly over the course of 6 months, she began to feel her heart again. She said, "I spent my entire life believing that if I stopped giving, I would stop mattering, and the day I finally stopped, I discovered that I had always mattered. I had just never let myself receive it." Her doctor confirmed that her blood pressure, which had been dangerously high for years despite medication, had dropped to normal levels, and he could not explain it medically. But Louise knew exactly what had changed. She had stopped trying to earn love and started letting herself be loved. She still serves, she still cares for people, but now she serves from a place of rest instead of exhaustion, and her service carries something it never carried before. It carries her presence, not just her labor. Pope John Paul II taught this truth over and over, that the heart that will not receive love cannot give love. It can only give duty, and duty without love becomes a burden that crushes the soul. He lived this himself in his final years, when his body was so broken that he could no longer perform the tasks that had defined his papacy. He could no longer travel. He could no longer speak clearly. He could no longer move without assistance. And yet those who were closest to him said that his presence during those years carried more spiritual power than anything he had done before, because he was no longer performing. He was simply being beloved by the Father. And that belovedness radiated from him even when his body had nothing left to give. You do not have to wait until your body gives out to learn what he learned. You can learn it tonight. The 5 forms of service that close your heart to divine love, according to St. John Paul II, are service performed to please people, service performed to avoid facing God, service performed to earn forgiveness, service performed to control the outcome, and service performed in place of receiving love. Every one of these forms of service turns your relationship with God into a transaction, and transactions do not transform you, they exhaust you. If you have recognized even one of these in your life, you need to know that the reason your prayers feel blocked is not because God is withholding his love. It is because you have been withholding yourself from receiving it. And the moment you stop performing and start receiving, everything changes. Tonight, before you go to sleep, go to the place in your home where you pray. Sit down without your rosary, without your prayer list, without anything you need to say or ask, and pray only this: "Father, let me feel how you see me." Do not rush it. Do not fill the silence. Just sit there and let him love you the way Pope John Paul II learned to let him love him when he could no longer do anything except receive. This is not laziness. This is not selfishness. This is the foundation of every true act of service, because you cannot give what you have not received. Write commit in the comments if you are going to do this tonight. If you are going to sit in silence and let God love you without offering him anything in return, without performing, without proving, just receiving. There are 3 women in your life right now who need this warning. One is a woman from your parish who has been serving faithfully for years, who is on every committee, who never says no, who looks exhausted every Sunday, and who has no idea that the reason her prayers feel empty is because she has been performing service instead of receiving love. And if you send this to her tonight, you may be giving her the permission she has needed for decades to finally stop and rest. One is a daughter or granddaughter who believes that her value is in what she does, who is running herself into the ground, trying to be enough for everyone, who does not yet understand that God does not love her because she is useful. He loves her because she is his, and she will not hear that from anyone unless someone who loves her is brave enough to say it. One is a friend whose service has become joyless, who is still showing up, still volunteering, still doing everything right, but who has lost the presence of God in the process, and who needs to know that it is not too late to come back, not by doing more, but by finally receiving what has been waiting for her all along. Do not wait. Send this to them now. This is not about a video. This is about protecting someone you love from spending another decade giving everything while believing she is worth nothing. May the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit bless your home and your prayer life tonight, as you step away from the service that has exhausted you and step into the love that has been waiting for you all along. May St. John Paul II, who learned in his final years to rest in the Father's love when his body could no longer perform, intercede for you as you learn to receive the love you have spent your life trying to earn. When you stop performing and start receiving, the service you offer becomes a gift instead of a burden, and your heart becomes what it was always meant to be, a place where God can dwell, not a stage where you prove your worth. You were never meant to earn his love. You were only ever meant to receive it, and the moment you do, everything you have been praying for begins to move.